Hello and welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Huayu, and here's what's coming up in the show. Why is North Korea ramping up missile tests? We'll ask an expert about how far Pyongyang's weapons program has come. A time for reflection in Indonesia after a deadly stampede at a football stadium. The so-called Brazil of Asia has been grappling with crowd control issues. And when arable land is in short supply, any urban space could be used as farmland. We'll look at the latest innovation in Taiwan. We begin in North Korea, where the latest spate of missile launches has put its neighbours on edge. The barrage of weapons tests include one that flew over Japan, covering the longest ever recorded distance, capable of reaching the US territory of Guam. The latest show of force comes after Kim Jong Un's regime passed a law outlining conditions for launching a pre-emptive nuclear strike. Now, joining me now is Erik Mobrand, the Korea Policy Chair at the US defense think tank RAND Corporation. Erik, thanks for being with us on France 24. Now, North Korea has already flown a record number of missiles this year, surpassing the activity in 2017. Why are they doing this?
These missile tests have come at the same time as joint exercises between the United States and South Korea. And sometimes they're treated as a response to those exercises. I think there's also a broader context. One point is that COVID and the COVID restrictions have made it difficult for North Korea to test any of the weapons they've been developing. And now, as restrictions have receded, a window has opened where they can get into some of their testing. Another context has to do with inter-Korean relations. In Seoul, we have a new president as of May. And the Yoon Suk-yeol administration has outlined a plan to target and destroy the North Korean leadership in the event of rising tensions. This move has infuriated Pyongyang. So I think North Korea wants to show that it's not only South Korea that can threaten preemptive attacks. So I think looking at the recent missile tests in view of COVID and in view of what's been going on in South Korea and inter-Korean relations is important to understand why we're seeing this.
Now, meanwhile, Pyongyang also appears to have reached new milestones. Earlier this year, it tested its first intercontinental ballistic missile and recently flew a mid-range one covering the longest ever distance. How significant are the recent technological advances?
They've had time to make these advances. And as you say, we have had the test over Japan that shows they can go some 4,000 plus kilometers into the ocean. And we understand they're developing missiles that can reach the continental United States. So I think these are certainly significant technological developments. It doesn't mean that we are on the brink of conflict beginning right away, but it does ratchet up the stakes in the event that tension does spill over into conflict.
Now, of course, in September, North Korea updated its law regarding the use of nuclear weapons, setting out conditions for carrying out pre-emptive strikes. Is the prospect of Pyongyang using a nuclear weapon becoming any closer to reality?
I think we should answer that question by thinking about the reasons why North Korea has its nuclear program. And the purpose of the North Korean nuclear program since the beginning has been for the country's security and as a bargaining chip. The country has long felt threatened, and nuclear weapons were developed as a way to deal with that feeling, as a deterrent. Now, we should not, of course, condone the nuclear weapons program as a good thing, certainly, far from it. But we should try to understand why they have done this so that we can have a realistic assessment of the threat and try to formulate better policies in response to that. But given this deterrent purpose or purpose as a bargaining chip, then I think there's little sense in North Korea initiating the use of nuclear weapons. But again, as the military gains these capabilities, it does raise the stakes in conflict on the peninsula.
Now, you've mentioned a bargaining chip, but under the current situation, are there any hopes of reviving nuclear talks to resolve the issue diplomatically?
Today, I think it would take something really special to see a diplomatic solution in the near future. A major problem is that denuclearization cannot be a precondition for talks about denuclearization. It has gotten us nowhere, and it leads only to more time for weapons development, for increased tension, and for chances that mistakes can happen and lead to worse scenarios. We saw a mistake earlier this week when South Korea fired a missile and it misfired and landed back on South Korean turf. In that instance, we had nobody hurt, thankfully, but it shows how mistakes can happen. And under these circumstances, such mistakes can be very dangerous.
Erik Mobrand from Rand Corporation, thank you so much for your insight once again.
My pleasure.
People in Indonesia are reeling from a recent stampede that killed more than 130 people, including children, at a football stadium. The tragedy began when angry fans ran onto the pitch after a match. The police fired tear gas at the crowd, causing panic. Many also suffocated from the tear gas. President Joko Widodo has ordered an audit of all of the country's football stadiums. France 24 sports editor Selena Sykes joins me for more.
Hi, Yuka.
Hi, Selena. Now, Indonesia, football is big in Indonesia, and Indonesia is no stranger to violence at football games.
That's right, unfortunately, Yuka. It isn't. The crush at Kanjuruhan Stadium is the deadliest in Indonesia, and it's actually one of the worst disasters in the history of football. The country, Indonesia, has the highest incidence of football-related violence in Asia. It's estimated that 74 deaths took place related to the game between 1994 and 2019. There's a big ultra and hooligan scene in Indonesia. It's commonplace, for example, for away teams to arrive at stadiums in armoured vehicles. There had been concerns in the run-up to this game between Arema FC and Persebaya Surabaya. Both of these teams are based in East Java, so this makes the game what we call a derby in football, which usually means a fierce rivalry between fans, which can see violence between home supporters and away visitors. And the authorities had foreseen this. There had been extra precautions in place. In fact, visiting Persebaya fans had actually been banned from attending the match in the city of Malang. Another big problem in Indonesia is overcrowding in stadiums, and this, along with heavy-handed police, was one of the problems that we saw behind this shocking tragedy. It's believed that 42,000 tickets were issued for the stadium, which only has a 38,000 capacity, and it's really quite commonplace in Indonesia for fans to find their way into stadiums without tickets.
So in some ways, in many ways, it was a disaster waiting to happen. But some fans in Indonesia have been complaining about the international media's focus on negative stories rather than the country's love for football.
That's right, Yuka. It's not very widely well known, but Indonesia is actually football mad as a country. They're sometimes dubbed as the Brazil of Asia just because of their pure passion for the beautiful game. There's 3 leagues, as well as amateur sides, which span across the vast country's many islands. Away fans sometimes have to travel up to 800 kilometres to see their teams play away, which really highlights their pure dedication to the game. There's also a massive following of Europe's top teams in Indonesia, such as the Premier League or La Liga in Spain. For example, there's around half the population, the 275 million population in Indonesia, that watch the English Premier League. And so I took, out of interest, a look at the following of my own team, Chelsea, a London-based club. Its fan club in Indonesia has over 100,000 followers on Facebook and 80,000 on Instagram. And this has been going on for a long time, Indonesia's love for the game. They were, in fact, the first Asian team to play at a World Cup in 1938, though things haven't been going so well for them since. They've long since been underachievers in Asia, and that's never come quite close to matching their fans' enthusiasm or their very large population, which should be a big talent pool for them. The men's side are ranked currently 152 in the world, though there is some hope for this next generation. They have a young generation of players who've qualified for the 2023 Asian Cup next year. That's the first time since 2007, and the average age of that squad is just 23. And they'll also be looking forward to hosting the FIFA Under-20 World Cup next year. $28 million of investment is going into facilities and stadiums.
As you just mentioned, Indonesia will be hosting the FIFA Under-20 World Cup next year. What can be done to ensure that safety of fans at this high-profile event?
Yeah, Yuka, there has been some concern that this recent disaster could push FIFA to find somewhere else to stage this high-profile event. That the Indonesian president has said that he's spoken to FIFA's president, Gianni Infantino, and that FIFA have offered help and support for the country to fix these problems. That will be a concern for next year. An audit of every stadium is going to happen in Indonesia to see that they check that they are in in line with safety protocols, and games have been suspended since that disaster while an investigation goes into exactly what happened during that deadly stadium crush. Experts are saying that crowd management and police need really, really big improvements. The police chief in charge during that event has already been sacked, and several officers have been suspended. There's also looking to be improvements in infrastructure with more development, and making sure that these stadiums, most importantly, aren't over capacity to begin with.
Well, Selena Sykes from our sports desk, thank you so much for your analysis. Change of pace now. When you think of organic farming, metro stations wouldn't be the first thing that comes to mind. But in Taiwan, a tech company has teamed up with the local transport operator to grow vegetables in underground spaces. Commuters can also buy salads fresh off the racks. Catherine Viet has the story.
Those hopping on the metro in Taiwan's capital passed an unusual sight: a hydroponic farm growing fresh produce, including lettuce. Dubbed Metro Fresh, the farm uses otherwise vacant spaces in the subway to create a sterile environment that makes it possible to avoid the use of pesticides and herbicides.
We use LED lights to replace sunlight. The advantage is we can control the amount of time these hydroponic plants get light. Also, this hydroponic farm is vertically stacked, so it works better in restrictive urban and land conditions.
These vertical indoor farms, also known as smart farms, are becoming increasingly popular in Taiwan, where only 25% of the land is suitable for farming. They are also less labor-intensive than traditional farming, protected from climate change, and produce higher crop yields.
Right now, our production yield is about 180 bags of lettuce. Each bag is 200 grams. We can produce 180 bags of lettuce each week.
It's a concept that Taiwan also hopes to export. The country's Yes Health Group has already partnered with Danish agritech startup Nordic Harvest to build a 7,000 square meter facility in Copenhagen. The island, too, is looking to expand its crop yields, hoping to supply much of the world's fruit and vegetables within the next 30 years.
That's it for this edition of Access Asia. Please do stay tuned to France 24. There's more world news coming up.
With Brazilians about to vote in the presidential election, our journalists went to meet the Lula generation. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was the country's first left-wing president. He instigated sweeping social reforms: student grants, access to free healthcare, affordable housing. But in 2018, he was accused of corruption and jailed, losing many of his activists and supporters. Some idolize him and some deplore him. But what has become of the Lula generation? Watch reporters on France 24 and France24.com.